I found my daughter-in-law's suitcase already packed on the porch at 5:40 in the morning, and she was sitting beside it with our granddaughter asleep against her shoulder, both of them shivering in the September cold. Her husband's family had changed the locks overnight. She didn't cry. She didn't knock. She just sat there, holding that little girl like she was the last solid thing left in the world. That was everything remaining of 11 years of marriage, a suitcase and a sleeping child on a stranger's porch step, because I want you to understand something right away. That porch wasn't her home anymore. It was mine. She'd come to me because there was nowhere else to go. But what put a knot in my chest that morning wasn't the sight of her sitting there. It was knowing I'd seen this exact morning coming for almost a year and a half, and I'd let it come anyway, because sometimes loving someone means letting them walk all the way to the edge before you show them you built a net. She didn't know I'd been awake since 4. Didn't know I'd been standing at my kitchen window with a cup of coffee going cold in my hand, waiting. And she had no idea that the woman who ordered those locks changed had just handed me exactly what I'd been patiently waiting 16 months to receive. Let me back up, because you deserve the whole shape of this before I tell you the rest. My name is Harold Whitfield. I'm 66 years old. Spent 31 years running an HVAC and electrical contracting business out of a 2-bay garage in Lubbock, Texas, before I sold it and mostly retired, though I still take a job here and there for men I've known since we were boys. I lost my wife, Marion, to a stroke 9 years ago, sudden as a light switching off, and I raised our daughter Rachel the back half of her growing up mostly alone. I tell you that so you understand who's talking to you. I'm not a clever man. I'm a patient one. Those aren't the same thing, but folks confuse them all the time, and that confusion has worked in my favor more than once. Rachel grew up steady. She became a large animal veterinarian, the kind who drives 45 minutes out to some rancher's property at 2 in the morning because a mare's in trouble, and never once complains about the mileage. If you want to know what a person's made of, look at what they're willing to do for less money than they're worth, in the middle of the night, for people who can barely pay them. That's my Rachel. She married a man named Dean Castellano 9 years ago. Dean was good, or I believed he was good, gentle in the particular way big men sometimes are, careful with his hands and his words. He didn't come from money. His mother, though, did. Her name is Vivian Castellano, and if you've ever driven through the nicer part of Amarillo, you've seen her name on a bank building and 2 shopping developments and a private school with a wrought iron gate. Vivian built an empire out of real estate holdings after her own husband passed young, and she never remarried, and she never, not once in 9 years, stopped acting like her son had married beneath his station. Dean brought Rachel to meet me for the first time at my house, and Vivian came along uninvited, which should have told me something all by itself. She walked through my home the way a woman walks through a barn she's deciding whether to demolish. She didn't say anything unkind. She never has to. She ran one finger along my mantle, looked at it, and said my house had good bones, for its age, like she was appraising livestock. I poured her sweet tea, and smiled and watched her the rest of that evening, and by the time she left, I had her whole number, and I did not care for what I'd added up. Here's something I need you to sit with for a second, friend. Because if you've ever watched your child bring someone new into the family and felt that small, cold drop in your gut when a stranger looks at your life and starts pricing it, then you already know exactly what I'm describing. I said nothing that night. A young couple's happiness deserves a fair, clean start before anybody starts pointing at cracks in the foundation. So I filed it away. That's a habit of mine. I file things away, and I wait to see if they matter. They married the following spring at Vivian's Country Club, 240 guests, a band flown in from Nashville. Vivian gave a toast that was really a speech about herself, about the family name Dean was carrying forward, about what she called the responsibility that comes with being welcomed into something built to last. Everybody laughed at the right moments. Dean laughed too. I didn't. I drove home that night, turning one word over and over in my hands: welcomed. The way she'd leaned on it like it was a gift she could take back any time she chose. I sat in my driveway a long while before I went inside. Then I got a spiral notebook out of a kitchen drawer and wrote the date at the top of the first page. I'd keep that notebook for the next 16 months. My granddaughter arrived 2 years into the marriage. 6 pounds, 4 ounces, a full head of black hair, and Rachel's exact stubborn chin. Dean called me from the hospital at 3 in the morning, and his voice cracked wide open in a way I'd never heard from him. "Harold," he said, "she's here. She's perfect. I don't have words." They named her Junie, after nobody in particular, just because they liked the sound of it, and something settled into that boy the day she arrived. The way a keel settles into a boat and finally lets it hold steady in rough water. He read to her every night. He built her a little swing set with his own 2 hands on a Saturday, sweating through his shirt, refusing my help even though I offered twice. He was, in every single way that has ever counted for anything, her father. I need you to hold on to that sentence, because it's going to matter more than you know before this is over. The trouble didn't arrive all at once. Trouble never does. It comes in small, unrelated pieces that only show you their shape once you lay them side by side on a table. About a year in, Dean mentioned that Vivian had offered him a position at her real estate firm, not selling property exactly, more what she called client relations for legacy accounts, which is a polished way of saying she wanted a likable young man with an easy smile to keep her oldest, wealthiest clients feeling flattered. Dean had been working as a high school shop teacher, good with his hands, good with kids who'd been written off by everybody else. She says it's 3 times what I make now, he told me. I asked what Rachel thought. He got quiet. She thinks I should consider it for Junie's sake. I asked what he thought. He said he didn't know yet. I told him to take his time, and I said nothing else. He took the job 4 months later. I drove out to his new office once, up on the second floor of one of Vivian's buildings downtown, a big window, leather furniture, everything smelling faintly of money that had been earned by somebody else a generation back. Dean wore a blazer that didn't sit right on him yet, like a rented suit at a funeral. He was proud, and I was proud of him for being proud. And underneath all of it, I was sick with worry about everything he'd quietly set down in order to stand in that room. Because here is something I've learned in 66 years on this earth. When a powerful person hands you something for nothing, they are not giving you a gift. They are installing a lever. And one day, they will pull it. It was my neighbor Otis who pointed me down the road I hadn't thought to walk yet. Otis practiced family law for almost 3 decades before he retired 2 doors down from me. He's not my lawyer. He's the man I've shared a fence line and 40 years of Sunday coffee with. One evening on my back porch, I was just thinking out loud, not accusing anybody of anything specific. Otis went quiet a long while. Then he said, "Did Vivian ever put Dean's name on that house they're living in?" I honestly didn't know. I called Dean that same night and asked, easy, like idle curiosity. Turned out the house, a stone-front colonial in one of the nicer parts of town that I'd always assumed the two of them had bought together, was titled entirely under a family trust that only Vivian controlled. Dean's name had never once appeared on that deed. "It's just cleaner for tax purposes," Vivian had told him. Otis looked at me over his coffee the next morning and didn't say a word. He didn't need to. That was the day I started keeping real notes instead of just a feeling. I want to talk to you plainly for a moment, because I think some of you have lived this exact loneliness. If you have ever sat across the table from someone you love and understood, clear as daylight, that they've walked smiling into a trap, and you also understood that telling them outright would only make them defend the very person who said it, then you know precisely what I'm describing. You see the whole shape of the thing, you can't say it yet. So you carry it by yourself. I carried it a long time. 7 months into that notebook, Rachel came to my house alone on a Tuesday afternoon, which had never once happened in 9 years of marriage. I made her tea, and she sat at my kitchen table and stayed quiet a long while before she spoke. "Dad," she said, "I need you to know I love Dean." I told her I already knew that, and I loved Junie more than my own life. I knew that too. She looked down into her cup. Vivian has ideas about how Junie should be raised. What school? What church, if any at all? Who she should be friends with. She calls it protecting the family's foundation. I asked what kind of ideas exactly. Rachel looked up, and what I saw on her face was a woman standing at a fork in a road she never chose and wasn't sure she was allowed to walk away from. "She thinks Dean is a good man," Rachel said, "but not." She stopped herself. "Not what?" I asked. She didn't answer me. She finished her tea and left 20 minutes later, and she hugged me at the door longer than she ever had before. I stood in my kitchen after that door clicked shut and didn't move for a long while. That night, I called Otis, and then I did something I never imagined I'd do in my life. I hired a private investigator. Her name was Marisol Reyes, quiet, patient, thorough, recommended by Otis without a second's hesitation. I asked her to trace the full financial structure connecting Vivian's businesses to my daughter's household. What Marisol found went so far past anything I'd feared that I had to read her report twice through. The house was owned outright by the Castellano family trust, revocable at Vivian's sole discretion, meaning she could dissolve the arrangement any single day she pleased, with no protections whatsoever for Rachel or Dean. Dean's salary ran through a management company Vivian also controlled, structured so that his position carried none of the legal protections a normal job would carry. And the postnuptial agreement Rachel had signed 4 years into the marriage, at Vivian's gentle insistence, using an attorney Vivian herself had recommended, contained language Rachel's own attorney at the time had called routine, but which Otis, reading it fresh, called some of the most one-sided contract language he'd encountered in 3 decades of practice. I read that postnup twice at my own kitchen table. Then I sat back and thought hard about the word welcomed. Now I have to tell you the part that changed everything for me. Not the house, not the money. This is the part that kept me up 3 nights running and turned everything I did afterward into something cold and exact. In the course of her work, Marisol had spoken with a woman who used to keep books part-time for one of Vivian's smaller subsidiary companies. Long gone from that job, no loyalty left to protect anyone. She told Marisol that Vivian had confided to her, years back, over drinks at a company holiday party, that she had quietly run a paternity test on Junie without anyone's knowledge, using a hairbrush she'd taken from the child's overnight bag during a weekend visit, because she had, in her own words, concerns about certain resemblances. According to this woman, the results had never been shared with Dean, only with Vivian's private attorney, and filed away. I sat with that for 3 full days, doing nothing but holding it. Then I built a plan, careful and small. I told Dean I was finally putting together a family medical history, something Marion and I had always meant to do, and that losing her the way I did made me want it done properly for Junie's sake too. I found a home kit. Dean thought it was a lovely idea. He had no notion that I sent a second sample from Junie, one I'd swabbed myself during a weekend she stayed with me, and called it Camp Grandpa, off to a private lab entirely on its own. The results came back on a Thursday. I read that envelope once, then slid it into the drawer of my study, beneath the notebook. Dean was not Junie's biological father, and I want to be very clear with you about what I did next. Nothing. I made no call. I gave no sign. I sat with the heaviest piece of paper I have ever held in my hands, and instead of lawyers, I thought about a 4-year-old girl who called me Pop Pop, who put ranch dressing on everything including fruit, and who was terrified of the vacuum cleaner. I thought about what she needed. Then I started building. I owe you honesty here, because you've stayed with me this far. If that envelope had landed in your hands instead of mine, I don't know what you would have done, and I don't know that I'd judge you for any version of it. The easy thing, the human thing, is to let betrayal pour straight out of you the moment you feel it. But I kept picturing that little girl's face, and a betrayal you broadcast too early can't protect anybody, so I swallowed it whole, for her. I spent the next 9 months in slow, deliberate preparation. Otis helped me find Dean a real attorney out of Dallas. Sharp, quiet, no ties whatsoever to Vivian or her usual firms, a woman named Priya Anand. I paid her retainer myself, out of money I'd been quietly setting aside since I sold the business, money I'd always meant for Rachel and Junie eventually anyway. We documented everything, the trust, the management company, the postnup, and precisely where each one collided with Texas family and property law. Marisol kept digging and found 2 former employees Vivian had pushed out of the company in almost identical fashion, once their usefulness ran dry. I called them both. I listened. One of them, a man named Deshawn, who'd managed 2 of Vivian's commercial properties for 11 years, told me something I wrote down word for word. "She never fires you outright," he said. "She just quietly makes your job impossible, until you've got no choice but to leave on your own. Then she tells everyone you walked away. And there's nothing on paper to prove otherwise." I didn't tell Dean any of it, not because I doubted him, but because I knew him. He'd have confronted Vivian within the hour, hot and raw, handed her every advantage, and her lawyers would have had a polished statement ready before supper. I'd watched that woman operate for 9 years. She was never once caught without a prepared position. I needed her caught flat, with nothing rehearsed. So I waited. And waiting, when you love people and can already see the blade coming for them, is the hardest kind of labor there is. The morning it finally came was a Tuesday in late September. I was standing at my kitchen window when Rachel called, and her voice was flat in that particular way a person's voice goes when they're holding themselves together purely through will. She locked us out, Dad. My key fob stopped working at Junie's school pickup line, of all places. Vivian called Dean at noon and told him his position was, in her words, being restructured out of existence. We drove home, and the garage code was already dead. There was a locksmith's van still parked outside when we pulled up. She stopped. Dad, Vivian said we should take some time to think about what's best for Junie's future. She said it like she was reading it off an index card. I closed my eyes for 2 full seconds. Where are you right now? I asked. Sitting in the driveway. Junie's asleep in her car seat. Is Dean with you? He's inside, trying to talk to her through the door. Dad, she won't even open it. Okay, I said. You get Junie, and you come to my house right now. Both of you. Tell Dean to call his attorney the second he gets in the truck. Silence on the line. Dad, what attorney? We don't have... Her name's Priya Anand, I said. Her number's already saved in Dean's phone under A. I put it there 8 months ago. Have him call her, then get in the truck, son. A long, long silence. Then, very quietly, you knew. Get in the truck, I said again. That's all that matters right now. Rachel showed up at my door an hour later, Junie still half asleep against her shoulder, Dean a few minutes behind her, gray-faced, gripping the steering wheel like it owed him an explanation. I sat all 3 of them at my kitchen table. I put coffee in front of the grown-ups and let Junie sleep on the couch under Marion's old quilt. Then I started at the very beginning and told them everything. The notebook, Marisol's findings, the trust, the management company, the post-nup, and what it actually said, line by line. I laid the folders out one at a time and let them read each one in silence. When I got to the paternity results, I stopped. There's one more thing, I said, and I need both of you to hear me out before either of you says a word. Dean looked at me. Rachel's hand found his across the table before I'd even finished the sentence, like some part of her already understood exactly what was coming. I slid the envelope across to Dean. Now I want you to slow down here with me, friend, because this was the moment 16 months of quiet work had been bending toward, and it deserves to be lived through second by second, not rushed. He picked it up. His hands weren't steady, and he was trying hard to hide that they weren't. The kitchen got so quiet I could hear the refrigerator humming and the clock above the stove and my own pulse in my ears. He opened it. He read it slowly, his eyes moving once across the page and then again, the way a person rereads something their mind refuses to let all the way in the first time. The color left his face the way I'd only seen once before, the night we got the call about Marion. He set the paper down very carefully, the way you set something down when you no longer trust your own hands to hold it steady. Outside, a dog barked twice, somewhere down the block, and went quiet. Inside that kitchen, nobody breathed. She's not mine, he said. It wasn't a question. Not biologically, I said. Rachel made a sound I'd never heard come out of her before, somewhere between a gasp and a sob, both hands flying to her mouth. Dad, did you know this whole time? Did I know? Her eyes were wild, searching Dean's face, then mine. I swear to you, Dean, I didn't know either. I swear on Junie's life I didn't know. And here's the thing I need you to understand about my daughter, because I believe it with my whole heart. I don't think she did know. I think somewhere along the way, years back, something happened that she herself never had full clarity on, and Vivian found out and buried it deep and used it like a knife she kept sharpened in a drawer, waiting for the day it would be useful. Dean looked up at his wife, then at me, and I have never in my life wanted to take another man's pain into my own body the way I wanted to take his in that moment. I said the only true thing there was left to say. That paper only proves one narrow fact. In every single way that has ever mattered, that little girl asleep on my couch is yours. She has always been yours. And nothing written on that page changes that. Not while I have breath in me. Dean pressed both hands over his eyes. His shoulders shook once, hard, and he didn't make a sound. I let him sit in it. I didn't reach for him, and I didn't rush to fill the silence, because some grief has to be allowed to land fully before a man can stand up straight underneath it. The clock kept ticking. The coffee went cold between all of us. Time stretched out the way it does at a graveside, where 1 minute carries the weight of an hour. Then, slowly, He lowered his hands. His eyes were red and wet and completely clear. And I watched my son-in-law decide, right there in real time, exactly who he was going to be in response to the largest, most irreversible piece of news of his entire life. "What do we do now?" he asked. "We already started," I told him. "I'll be honest with you one more time, friend. If I'd been the one sitting in that chair, I don't know that I'd have found my footing that fast. I don't know that I'd have skipped clean past the betrayal and landed directly on the love. But that's the strange thing about raising people, whether they're your own blood or not. You don't get to pick the test life eventually gives them. You only get to hope that whatever you poured into them years back is still load-bearing on the day the real weight finally comes down. His was. Priya Anand filed the first documents that Friday morning. The core of it was simple, even if the work behind it wasn't. The trust's failure to ever formally transfer the house, combined with 9 years of Rachel and Dean living there, raising a child there, paying utilities and taxes and repairs there, created enforceable, equitable rights under Texas property law, a promise relied upon in good faith for nearly a decade. The management company's pay structure, with no genuine employment contract behind it, gave Dean a strong claim for lost wages and benefits going back years. And the postnup, reviewed now by an attorney with no ties to Vivian whatsoever, had been signed under conditions that raised serious, documented concerns, especially once it came out that the attorney Vivian originally recommended had a 19-year financial relationship with Vivian's firm that was never once disclosed to Rachel. Vivian's lawyers responded within 2 days. They were sharp. They were fast. They had clearly braced themselves for some version of this. What they had not braced for was the full scope of it. Marisol had spent the better part of a year being thorough. Deshawn came forward with his own records, kept in a fireproof lockbox in his garage for exactly this kind of day, and his situation mirrored Dean's closely enough to establish a pattern in front of a judge. The second former employee, a woman named Colette, had records of her own that only strengthened it further. And then there was what Rachel did. I won't speak harshly about her, and I never will, not once. She was raised, at least the last stretch of her adult life, orbiting a woman who never once let her make a decision that didn't ultimately serve that woman's own interests. But when Rachel finally understood the complete shape of what had been quietly done to her marriage, her husband, and her daughter's future, she made a choice I believe cost her more than most people watching this will ever fully see. She sat Vivian down herself, alone, no lawyers in the room, and told her exactly what she now knew. And when Vivian tried, coldly, to explain it away as protecting the family's interests, Rachel walked out of that house and never went back inside it again on her own 2 feet. She called Priya's office herself the next morning and handed over 3 years' worth of financial statements Vivian had once given her for safekeeping, documents that ended up mattering a great deal. Here's where I owe Vivian Castellano a moment of honesty, because I think it matters. Even now, I don't believe she wakes up most mornings deciding to be cruel. I think somewhere deep down, she genuinely believed she was protecting something precious that she alone had built out of nothing after her husband died young and left her with 2 toddlers and a mountain of debt. To a woman like that, money isn't comfort, it's armor. A structure she has spent her whole life defending because she remembers exactly what it felt like to have none. She looked at Dean, a gentle shop teacher with calloused hands and no head for business, and she genuinely saw a weak beam in a building she'd spent 4 decades reinforcing. She thought quietly removing him and controlling what she could of Junie's upbringing was kinder in the long run than open war. She believed, right up until the very end, that she was being a good steward of everything she'd sacrificed to build. That's the particular tragedy of people like Vivian. They confuse control with love so thoroughly and for so long that by the time they're old, they genuinely can't tell the two apart anymore, and everyone standing near them ends up paying the structural cost of that confusion. Understanding that didn't make me forgive her, but it did make everything that followed feel less like revenge and more like a building finally getting inspected by an engineer it couldn't charm, threaten, or buy off. The settlement took just under 5 months. I won't lay out every last piece of it, because some of it remains sealed and some of it simply isn't anyone's business but ours. What matters is the outcome. The house was transferred fully into Rachel and Dean's names, jointly, no strings, no trust, no revocable anything. The very legal machinery Vivian had assumed would always protect her was turned around and used, correctly, to finally enforce the promise that House had represented for 9 straight years. Dean's lost wages were settled in full, with interest, legal fees included. The postnup was voided entirely, on the record, in open court. Vivian never spent a single night in a jail cell, and I want to be straight with you about that too, because I know some of you are hoping I'll tell you otherwise. What she did was structured carefully enough, over enough years, to stay just inside the civil side of the line, and I'm not naive about what money and good lawyers can buy in that regard. But two of her longest-standing commercial partners, once the full pattern came out in those proceedings, quietly stepped back from every deal they had pending with her. A shopping center development she'd been chasing for 4 years fell apart in financing within a single quarter. Her name stopped opening every door in this town that it used to open without question. I'll take that. I'll take every bit of that, all day long. This is the part of the story where I tell you what all of it taught me, because I suspect you came here for more than just an ending. This whole business taught me that the most dangerous people in your life rarely ever raise their voice at you. They smile. They send gifts at Christmas. They build a comfortable cage one bar at a time, so slowly and so gently that by the time you notice you're inside it, you've already thanked them for the furniture. The mistake most folks make is believing that generosity and control can never wear the same coat. They can. And the thing Rachel finally understood, that nobody else in that family ever quite grasped, is that protecting your own child sometimes requires walking straight out on the person who raised you. So here's something you can actually go do today, and I mean today, not next week. If somebody has given you a house, a job, a future, get your name on the paperwork. Read the deed. Read the contract, every last line of it, twice. Love and a signature are not the same thing, and the people who tell you not to bother worrying about that difference are usually the very ones counting on you never looking closely. And here's a question I'd like you to sit with after you finish reading this. If everything you currently have were quietly held in somebody else's name tonight, how free would you really be tomorrow morning? Junie turned 5 this past January. We threw her party right here at my place, because Rachel and Dean are staying with me for a while as they get back on their feet and figure out what comes next for their little family. She wanted a dinosaur theme, so I spent a Saturday afternoon letting a 5-year-old tape a cardboard triceratops horn onto my forehead while I sat out on the back porch in the cold, playing the part of the last dinosaur on Earth, apparently a very silly one. She thought this was the single funniest thing that had ever happened in the history of the entire world. Dean stood in the doorway watching the two of us, working through something that wasn't grief exactly anymore, more like the slow, patient work of learning to hold a new shape for a thing he'd once thought he understood completely. He's doing that work honestly, every single day. He still builds her furniture with his own hands. He still reads to her every night it's his turn. He has not faltered once, not for a single day, and I don't expect he ever will. Folks sometimes ask me whether I feel guilty for letting my daughter and her husband walk through all those months in the dark without warning them what was coming. I don't have a clean answer for that. What I know is that if I'd told either of them too early, Dean would have confronted Vivian straight from raw feeling instead of from real strength, and he'd likely have ended up isolated, with no clear way forward, and no leverage at all. What I built took time and silence, and every bit of discipline I had to hold a plan steady while every instinct in my body screamed at me to act sooner. Was it the right call, keeping them both in the dark that long? I honestly don't know. I know it was necessary. Before I let you go tonight, I want to hear from you, because I read every single comment you leave me, and honestly, your answers are the whole reason I keep coming back here to tell you these things. Tell me the truth. Do you think I did right, keeping my own daughter and her husband in the dark while I quietly built all of this behind the scenes? Comment number 1, if you believe I did right protecting them in silence. Comment number 2, if you believe a father owes the people he loves the truth the second he learns it, no matter what it costs. Comment number 3, if you're somewhere in between and still turning it over in your own head tonight. And while you're down there, tell me where in this country you're watching from and what time it is on your clock right now. I genuinely love seeing how far these stories travel after dark. And if you've ever had somebody with money or standing look straight through you and decide your life was theirs to quietly rearrange, tell me about it below. You are not nearly as alone in that as you might feel tonight. If this one moved you, even just a little, do me a small kindness before you go and subscribe. It's just me and a handful of good people who care about stories like this one, and every single subscriber genuinely keeps this whole thing running. Stay a while longer if you can. There are more stories where this one came from, and I'd truly like to have you here for them. The quietest kind of love isn't the one that shouts the truth the moment it's found. Sometimes it's the one that waits, builds, and protects until the people you love can stand steady enough to hear it. A signature on paper matters, sure, but what actually holds a family together is showing up night after ordinary night long before anyone asks you to. A small note for you. This story was written and imagined by AI purely for your entertainment, though I hope the heart of it still landed as something true